out.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
No place.
Right. Right.
So it's not a collection station.
You are all very, very welcome here to the memorial in remembrance of our beloved friend and family member, Jim Benson. I welcome you on behalf of the family, and we begin with prayer. Blessed be the God, our Father, the source of all mercy and the God of all consolation, who comforts us in our sorrows so that we, as one body in love, can comfort one another in our times of need. Friends and family, loved ones of Jim Benson, we gather today surrounded by his spirit to remember his life. We mourn his loss, we celebrate his life, and we give thanks for the gift of his spirit that has touched the life of everyone in this room. Though Jim has passed on from this world, his spirit and memory endures with us, not to be diminished or forgotten, because love, the love that he felt for all of you and the love that you felt for him, knows no time. It is as steadfast as the love that God has poured into all of creation, that each of us receives as a gift without cost. For though there is for everything a season and a time for every matter under heaven, nothing can ever separate us from the love of God. And so, dear God, we pray for our brother Jim, that he hear and feel the love of the people in this room, that he might know and take rest in the comfort that his friends and family will continue to care for one another in their mourning, and that God, whose grace freely abounds, will comfort all who call upon him. By the example of your Son, Christ Jesus, who took children lovingly into his arms and blessed them, we entrust Jim to your never-failing care and love. Comfort us as we bear the pain of his death, and receive us all into your everlasting arms. In your name we pray. Amen. Dear friends, this day is a day of remembrance for Jim. Family and friends alike will be sharing stories, memories, and emotions. This will be a space where tears and laughter are welcomed. And so I invite Jim's good friend, Joe Levitt, to please come forward as steward of this time of remembrance.
Pastor Solberg, thank you very much. And thank you to Lakewood Country Club for allowing us to host this event. Almost 10 years ago, I had the honor of being MC at Jim's 70th birthday party, which was also here. But I'll say there is no higher honor I think I've ever received than being asked by Cynthia to do the same function today. So thank you. It is a solemn occasion, but it is also a time for appreciation, for reflection, and for gratitude. As Jim touched all of our lives and affected them greatly. I myself have known Jim for over 30 years, knew him as a great leader, as a mentor, as a colleague, and as a friend. In fact, I think there were a few people who have had a greater impact on my life than he did. Two main words and characterizations come to mind. Number one is stature, and number two is warmth. By stature, I don't mean physical stature, although he was a pretty big man. I mean he was a man of great substance. He always wanted to get right to the heart of the issue. What's the problem? That became his calling card, at least at work. He was a consummate problem solver, and we all learned from that. That trait alone earned him senior positions throughout the FDA, as you'll learn, many of you know, but others will learn later in the program. But many leaders had great stature. What really separated Jim was his personal warmth that went along with those strong leadership traits. He had an amazing gift for personal empathy, and he always connected with people on a deep personal level. It always amazed me. He was at his best when I was at my worst. And there aren't very many people that you can say that about. And I think that's really what I cherished the most and what I will miss the most. I'm not the only one. You all are testament to that. And many people could not be here. One person who could not today, because she's actually attending a similar service out of town for a close relative, is Liz Jacobson, Liz Krell, depending on your years of knowing her. She worked for Jim for many years. Cynthia had sent around an email that many of you got entitled My Hero. And Liz sent this back yesterday and authorized me to read it to you. I'm so sorry not to be there with you all. Jim was a huge influence on me, as he was for so many people. He taught me so much, and I will be forever grateful to have been able to work with him. I know tomorrow, meaning today, will stir up all kinds of feelings, including your sorrow over losing him, but it is also such an important opportunity for his friends and family to share their appreciations of the fact that he was in all of our lives. He was our hero too. I wish I could be there. Love, Liz. We have, as you see, a large group today. We will first hear from Jim's family members. Jim and Cynthia worked very hard to create a combined family. I know I came from a combined family myself. It does not come easily, but I know everyone here speaking really feels close affinity and love for Jim. We'll also hear from Jim's friends from his more recent times and friends from his years at the FDA. Finally, there will be a buffet luncheon following the service. We ask everybody to join. If you have not had time on your way in, if you could try to take time to sign the book at some point before you go. We also, as you noticed, are videotaping this event. During the luncheon, someone with the video machine will walk around, and if anybody else wants to say anything, this will be a keepsake for the family and something that I know they will cherish. So if you have anything that you'd like to say later into the microphone, you'll have your opportunity to do so. Let me now turn and introduce in a moment Jim's son, Mark Benson. I remember one day I was on a board of directors of the Food Allergy and Anaphylaxis Network called FAN. And I was speaking at a conference, and I'm in the back afterwards, and this young man walks up to me looking vaguely familiar, saying, "Hi, I'm Jim Benson's son." And I kind of looked at him and I said, that's interesting. And he explained he had a daughter who had a nut allergy, and that combination earned Jim a seat on the board of directors shortly after that. So it is certainly, I think, important. This is a time for friends and family, but mostly family. So I'm pleased to start with Mark Benson.
I'm watching to see if my sister walks in. She was landing at 9 o'clock this morning, and so should be here. You are? Come on. Okay, wonderful. I'm glad to see it. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, everyone here. And thank you, Joe, for helping. Again, that's awesome. There's so many people I recognize, especially in this row over here, from years and years and years, and everybody who worked with Dad and I knew over the years, and I appreciate everyone being here. I promised I wouldn't take too long, so I'm going to be watching that. But I had a whole lot I wanted to say. I wanted to say as much as anything else, sort of what Dad meant to me, and hopefully share a little bit about what he, the stories, as there's so many people from work here, it's the stories that sort of made him more of who he was through that. So I'm going to go through, share a few of those. So my full name is Markland James Benson. I wanted to share that because I'm named after my dad, of course, and his dad, and our whole family. You guys probably recognize me from my bad posture and my height. I never quite got as tall as my dad, or my gray hair. I have more than he did. He combed it over for so long, I was clueless. I think until about college that I realized what that was. He told me one time as we're sitting in church, as I told a bad joke at an inappropriate time, he said, "You're just like your grandfather in that." And so you're going to hear it today. I decided that you'll hear some, hopefully not too inappropriate jokes as we go along. But just to share other things I inherited from him is a love of chocolate. When I was a kid, I would make chocolate chip cookies for myself, a whole batch. And it was always okay with my dad as long as I got some of those into the cookie jar. And he'd come home every day and he'd check that cookie jar as he'd cross the kitchen. He still had his briefcase in his hand. He'd check the cookie jar, say hello at the same time. Sometimes he was happy, sometimes he wasn't. Because there were cookies or not, I didn't make them every day. And then he'd go and set his briefcase down next to his favorite recliner. Many would know, everyone in the family knows his recliner. That recliner had different colors and shapes and recoverings over the years, and even was reborn a few times, including there being a West Coast recliner and an East Coast recliner for a while. Aaron and Kelly and I used to fight over that recliner when he wasn't home, so we could see who could sit in the chair the longest, and we'd have to plan it carefully, because if you had to go to the bathroom, you lost the chair. So we'd spend that time with that. He'd go upstairs, he'd get changed after checking the cookie jar, and he'd come back, and his signature plaid shorts, Bermuda shorts, and striped shirt, which not until Jeff highlighted to me in college, it just doesn't match. What you're wearing right now doesn't match, and what he used to wear all the time didn't match, and I still have trouble with that. The recliner was in his man cave / office / entertainment center. It was like that when I was 5 and 7 and 10. It was like that in that house, giant house in Rockville. There he could design it into the house. I have the same thing in my house, and although I didn't do it on purpose, and I don't have quite the recliner, and I get plenty of options from my wife about how to make it better, but it's just the way it kind of rolled out. He'd sit down in that chair and he'd watch the Orioles or the Colts or the Bullets, and work, and he'd sit down and he'd grab his favorite pens off the table that he made. He built awesome, beautiful tables in my mind that sat next to that recliner for years and still does in Rockville. He also built the ping pong table that is in my house, and he also built the entertainment center that's in my house. And the kids' video games are in, and I store my records in. Anyway, he'd turn to that table, and he'd pick up his green pens, and he'd start working while he watched every night. He'd mark up and read and sign the different documents all in green, and it was a few jobs and many years before I realized that green was not a normal business color. He'd also go into his workshop for hours on end, and he'd spend a lot of time making, building up furniture, for example, and he showed me how to do many things. I learned a ton down there. How to work with wood, how to work with different kinds of electronics. He built a clock radio before anybody had a clock radio. It was a Heathkit. I would show friends the clock radio, and that clock radio is still next to his bed 50 years later, 40 years later. He built a TV, color TV with a remote control, literally a decade before I knew anybody else with a remote control. Then he wouldn't have to get out of his recliner. And we had a TV antenna that could change directions, and the neighbors would talk about it. You could adjust it. I'm going to watch channel 45 from Baltimore, and you'd turn it, and it would face northwest, and then you could catch it, or northeast. He'd also built, he eventually got into rockets, which we did together, and we build rockets and shoot them off and watch the parachute not deploy and crash into a tree or something, but it was fun and entertained most of the kids in the neighborhood. He'd also built RC planes. That became a real addiction for him for years and years, and he still has them cluttered around the house in Rockville in the garage. And he used to take me up there to watch him fly him. I got to fly him now and then. I never really got it, and I was bored most of the time, I have to be honest. Because he was doing it, and he didn't want me to do too much. He built a boat, too, a little RC remote control boat, and that never went anywhere that did anything. He tried it up at the farm and the pool and pond a couple times, but it just sat there until the wind finally blew it to shore. So, not quite what he hoped for, but it's beautiful. I also watched him in the 70s get into exercise and losing weight, and he quit smoking all at the same time. He just, I guess, with the discovery of all those things being bad for you, he changed his life. And that, I inherited sort of that too, and I watched him go through that. I never smoked, always kind of managed what I ate, so I've been very lucky to have that experience in my life. I did smoke once. He left a cigarette in the ashtray one time, and I picked it up and tried it and coughed, and he caught me. And we had to talk about that for 2 hours. That was the punishment at my house growing up. He wanted to use psychology on me, and when I did something wrong, we'd talk for hours about it until I never did it again. And if you didn't know, he wanted to go to college and be a psychiatrist. And his father forced him to be an engineer, which certainly he did well with. But I think that's why he ended up in management and offers great advice and did all this kind of stuff, because he gravitated towards that. And I got to live with that too. Let's see. You know, when there were times in my life, Joe, you made an interesting comment. At my worst, he was his best. I was many times the worst thing going on in his life. Considering what he was doing at work, and I was at home wrecking the car, or getting arrested, or getting suspended from school. Every single time we had to have hours of discussion. And I never wrecked a car twice, and I never got arrested twice, and I never got suspended twice, but I did it. I tested every boundary I could, and you know, at my worst, he was his best. We used to go up to the farm in Upper Cove, Maryland a lot. We're real close to Benson Mill Road, if you ever hear of that, and up there we'd spend almost every other weekend when I was young. And I loved it. I loved being close to my cousins and not part of my family. But for Dad, he felt compelled to go. His father really pushed that on him. And so he never pushed that same thing on me. I always had full freedom to show up or not show up or do whatever I wanted. And I showed up. I still wanted to be there. On the while in the hospital, I went on a business trip. I saw him in the hospital on Sunday and went on, and he was like, yeah, go, you'll be fine. Go on your business trip to South Carolina. And, you know, I got to see him again when I came back, but that was a reflection of him always letting me do whatever I wanted and giving us, Kelly and I, the freedom to come and visit any way we wanted. And we did. We got it. Anyway, going back to the farm, those trips in the summer, we'd always go up there and spend time picking vegetables and cleaning them, and, you know, asparagus or green beans or corn or whatever it was, and eating them for dinner that night. So that was kind of a neat experience too. The one thing I do remember in August is the peach trees that line the side of the driveway, and him and my grandfather just picking them. And it just stuck in my mind. So So in a couple weeks, I'm going to plant a peach tree at home. It was supposed to be a joke, but it's not coming out as well as I hoped. That was going to be a trick on you. We're going to have a peach tree soon. He was always involved in everything I did as a kid. He coached basketball, even though he knew nothing about basketball. And he'd read books to make sure he knew what he was doing. I, in turn, growing up, I have taught my girls soccer because that's what they liked, and I've been reading books and figuring out how to be a better coach. One basketball story, there was, I'm pretty sure I have the story right. Back in the Nixon years, there was one of the guys who worked for Nixon's job was to go into different agencies and be the axe man, reduce the size of the agency. And that gentleman, I have no idea what his name is. I wish I could figure it out. No, I don't. I don't want it to be a bad story about someone in the end. But but his son was a very good basketball player, probably the best in the league in McLean youth basketball. And so he set out to make sure we won that game. That was the top team and the top guy, and he studied his books. He said, we got to use a boxing one for this, and he set out to make sure it happened. And on that Saturday morning at Longfellow Middle School in McLean, we won that game. Taken into politics, and for all the career government employees, we won that game for him. And he told that story 6 months ago to somebody, a friend of mine. So it's a great tribute to what he liked. He was involved too in my Boy Scouts. We made a Pinewood Derby car together. He probably did more than his fair share of it. But I won a trophy, and it looked awesome, and I still have it sitting behind my bar in my basement, along with the trophy, along with the basketball trophy. So he was involved, and he made sure to be a part of that stuff. He also watched the girls play soccer and do ballet and all that stuff. He saw the Nutcracker multiple times. He enjoyed that. He took Kelly and I scuba diving in Key Largo years ago, and I remember seeing a barracuda. That was when I was in college, and I think she was a senior or a freshman, one or the other. We took I took my girls snorkeling, not scuba diving yet, and we've seen stingrays and squid and even a barracuda one time in Aruba, so it was neat. I have to tell one more key story, and then I'll try and wrap up, even though I'm halfway through. We went to see Star Wars when that first came out. Not the first one, the second one, because that was a bigger deal, and you had to buy tickets months in advance to go see it in that theater down on Connecticut Avenue, The Empire Strikes Back. And as we left, and as we're walking past the crowd of people waiting to come in, all in a single file line, he just said as loudly as he could, as if he was having a conversation, "Can you believe that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father?" He just enjoyed that. It still sticks out. He loved his cars, his BMW and his Stealth and his Lancia and his Porsche and his BMW and his other BMW. He went to a race car driving school down in North Carolina at one point, just so he could drive faster, and I inherited that habit from him. If you think I drive fast, you should have seen him. Erin and I used to watch him, go out of our way to watch him back out of her driveway, because he would just go in reverse at full speed as if there was no time left to get out of there. He also had his pilot's license. He and I took lessons together. I was too busy having fun or getting suspended from high school or something. I was just had other interests, so I never finished. That was probably my biggest regret in my life, is not following through that with him. But he got it. He flew around. He enjoyed it. Also want to share that at Christmas time, when the Richards were here, and Bo and Damien and Renee were all down, and we all had Christmas dinner together with my family, and he tried to say a toast to Cynthia, and he couldn't get it done. He was so emotional. He was trying to say thank you for everything that you'd done as he was going through all his challenges. I asked my girls what they liked about Granddad. Brooke said right away he was just always super happy. And Maya said he was just clearly cared about us. And Samantha gave it a little more thought. She took a class at Johns Hopkins and stayed with Cynthia and Dad last summer, and about engineering. And so she'd come home every day and share what they learned in class. And he said no matter what the subject was, what level or field of engineering, he understood and contributed to the conversation. He just knew. It reflects on his personality there. So I'm not as tall as my dad, and I'll never get there. I finally realized I gave that up in college. Jim Benson, or James S. Benson, he was a farmer and a scuba diver and a pilot and a race car driver and a carpenter and a coach and a presidential awardee, a nuclear engineer and a board member in many different firms and things, and a husband and a father and a grandfather. And I had a pretty cool dad. And at 53, I won't ever reach the height he did in many ways. But I know I can keep on striving. And my best success in my life has been when I emulated him. So I'll keep on doing that to my benefit more than anybody else. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Kelly, I'm not sure if you know you're next, so I'm giving you this warning. But next is Jim's daughter, Kelly Benson, as you've heard. She had to fly a long way to get here and came up today, but obviously we know nothing would have stopped you from being here. So please come on up.
That was so fun. Thank you, Marklin. I really enjoyed the stories. Brought back a lot of memories. I don't have as many stories. It's a little bit shorter. But I really just want to say I'm so grateful to be here and be surrounded by people that loved and respected my dad. Right now, I really only feel my dad's warmth and love since he's passed. I don't feel sad, just very fortunate for all the beautiful, loving, and caring things he did for me. I feel him holding me against his chest, like a baby. I just can really feel him still. I will think of him and carry his compassion and love forward in my life. Dad wanted to make a positive difference in the world, and boy, did he. He was so passionate to understand and inform people so we could all have better lives now and for generations to come. One of my favorite things that Dad said was, I believe in the human race and technology. No matter what problems we face, we will figure it out. Dad's curiosity influenced me to be one of the only kids from my small high school, which was a class of 50 on the Oregon coast, to go to college and to go further to get my master's degree. From that degree, my undergrad's in journalism. I now have an online newspaper, and we're actually going to have a printed edition coming. So that's super exciting, and I feel like that is the passion to actually inform people about what's going on, and that really came from Dad. And one of my latest conversations with him, my friend that I had the paper with passed away, and I had to continue it, which was really difficult, but he was really proud of me for being passionate about getting information and getting true information out to people. I'm also a director, the Healthy Living Director at our local county YMCA. I feel like a lot of that drive, for people to be as healthy as they can, again, came from Dad. I get to inform people with the paper, and I watch and encourage people to make positive changes in their lives at the YMCA. This is kind of another favorite thing that Dad quoted, and this is like before The Secret and everything, but the Albert Einstein, when I was going through, he quoted this when I was going through a difficult time in my life and didn't really know if I should make changes that I needed to make. And he actually quoted, "The law of nature states everything has a vibration." If you've taken a chemistry class, you probably remember learning about atoms and that everything is made up of atoms. These atoms are in a constant state of motion, and depending on the speed of these atoms, things appear as liquid or gas or as a solid. Sound is also a vibration, and so are our thoughts. Everything manifests itself in your life is there because it matches the vibration from your thoughts. This encouraged me to make major changes in my life. Dad explained, to be alive is to make changes and to move. Kind of with that whole level of vibration level, it has a lot to do with me, with having people move and having them, be the best that they can be. And my actual personal email is Kelly Vitality, so kind of resonates with me. My hope is to touch, move, and inspire people to vibrate at their highest level. And I thank Dad for that. That's it.
Thank you. It's difficult for people to come and stand up here, I know, so everybody just take the time that you need. We're hearing from people who've known Jim for many, many years, in some cases their whole lives. Next person to speak has known Jim longer than anyone else who'll be speaking, and that is Jim's sister, Harriet Forster.
First, I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. A lot of support, Cynthia. Okay. I do recall being here 9 years ago for Jim's birthday. It was a different day.
Excuse me, Harriet, we're just gonna pull this down.
Oh, okay.
Is that better?
I never got as tall as him either. Okay. While we all share grief today, it is a time to lift our hearts to Jim and to celebrate. Jim was always there for me. I never had to ask. He was there. Oh boy. Some early memories for me are my brother telling me that our mother had died. I was 5 at the time, and I guess as these two didn't understand what it meant. At that time and going forward, he was thrust into being a partial parent. There's some irony in this event, but I'll get to that in a minute. Since Jim was older and bigger than me, there was a lot of teasing and tormenting growing up. However, I got bigger too. And I gave it back pretty well. I remember begging my brother to let me go on dates with him. I assured him I would sit in the back seat and not say a word. And you can imagine how happy he was. And I told him, I'm going to go with you. He said no. So I took his car keys and I hid him. And he said, if you don't give them back to me, I'm going to strangle you. It's a common conversation. And I said, fine, then you'll never get them back. It was a standoff, but he got them back. I also remember Jim helping me with algebra. I was terrible at algebra. He was good at algebra. Finally, one time, he just looked at me and he said, "Why can't you learn this?" And I looked at him and I said, "Why didn't you learn how to spell?" Some people here will understand, some will not. My brother had problems spelling. I had problems with algebra. Jim was always there for me. As I mentioned in the beginning, he had to tell me our mother died. In 1978, on Christmas Eve, I had to call Jim and tell him our father had. He was always there for me. Bright and early the next day, Christmas morning, he was. Mark, you made me remember some stories too. I remember the 4 cousins. They were such good kids. Laying on the floor and laughing. I had 2 sons. Jim had Mark and Kelly, and they would literally lay on the floor and laugh at each other. And we didn't get it. You know. Do you remember that? Yeah, you did. You did. Sometimes they behaved, but not all the time, right, Mark? No, they were good, but they enjoyed. I think each of the cousins are about 18 months apart. Yeah. Mark was first, then PJ, then Kelly, and then Jeff. Thank you, Cynthia. You've done a wonderful job. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet, very much. As time went on, Cynthia came into Jim's life. I remember early on she referred to him as her Sean Connery. I knew she was smitten, it was all over. and Jim gained 2 new children, Daniel and Renee. And so we'll first hear from Daniel, who wins the award for the best handkerchief.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. So, I want to start off with a little bit about my mom. My mom is a hero to us, and we're extremely proud of her. For all she's done in our times of need, I hope we've been able to reciprocate somewhat. My mom raised us as a single mom, working a full-time job, teaching us, keeping us in many diverse activities, keeping the house immaculate, surrounding us with ideas, lessons, learning, friends, family, animals, and instilling a sense of pride in us. My mom never had a day off or even a minute off. And friends and family asked her why she never dated. And she always said she didn't have time for that nonsense. And even if she did, she didn't want to bring just anybody around her kids. So when I was about 17 and Renee was 15, Mom told us she met somebody special. And at that age, I was in an angsty phase, and when my mom told me that, she expected me to roll my eyes about somebody special, but I was willing to see who this person was. So I came down the stairs, and I was dressed in raver clothes, which my buddy Naeem knows because I showed up to my first interview like that too, and he said, go across the street to Macy's and get some normal clothes if you're starting tomorrow. but, you know, it was baggy jeans and crazy stuff and chains and nail polish. And I came down the stairs and I expected Jim to look at me and say, "Oh boy." But Jim introduced himself and he shook my hand and he treated me with respect and as a peer. We talked for a few minutes and I thought to myself, wow, what a cool, non-judgmental guy. And I didn't find that to be normal behavior from adults at that age. And my mom asked me later on what I thought, and I said, "What do you think? Jim's awesome, clearly." So the second time I met Jim, I was about to drive to Baltimore in the family station wagon that had become my first car and was breaking down every few days. And I quipped to Jim, "I hope I make it there." And Jim had a look of concern on his face and he said, "Why?" And I just said, "Ford." And I think that's all that needed to be said. And he tossed his keys to me, and it was like a slow motion scene from an 80s movie. It was like the keys were slowly flying through the air, and my mom was staring at me wide-eyed, like you can't drive his car, with the look of concern. And Jim had a smile on his face, like, "I've got you covered." And I caught the keys and I looked down at them bewildered, and I was like, wow, it says Porsche on there. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a lot of fun. So I brought the car back in one piece, so I think I passed Jim's initial test. Maybe the next time I met Jim, next time or two I met him, he said he wanted to talk. And I like Jim, so normally I wouldn't have been okay with that, and I would have said, "That's okay, I gotta go." But I said, "Sure." And we sat down and talked. And he told me my mom and my family were worried about me, and I'd gone from being a great student to off on some weird tangent. I was full of self-doubt, but he understood and he said, "Don't worry, Danny, you're going to do great." And I believed in what he said. And, it wasn't false, and it was genuine. And, you know when you meet somebody that won't say something just to say it, and that's how Jim was, and I knew he would speak his mind. So, I can't underestimate how much that helped me at the time and how life-changing that small event was. I might have said a quiet thank you, but I never said a real thank you, so I hope it's not too late. So fast forward 25 years, and Jim was unwavering and constant to the point that it's just assumed that he'll be there. As a voice of reason, a supporter, a confidant, an advisor, a friend, and a father. He was always there, the same grounded and realistic, positive approach at all times. Jim was a rare person that brought out the best in everyone. He was universally admired, and he had friends all over the place, from all walks of life. And upon his passing, there was an endless queue of people reaching out to the family. So the last time I saw Jim, my mom did a Christmas in May, and that seems like, just a few hours ago, and it was already almost a month ago. I got caught up with business obligations and travel, and I kept deferring coming down for Christmas. And finally in May I came, and my mom made a big event, and it was a lot of fun. And of course me and Jim thought it was funny that the Christmas tree was still up, and my mom was playing holiday music, and we had food. And I wrote Jim a card, and I thought about a lot of things to write, and I decided to keep it simple because I thought that Jim would appreciate a simple message that said what it needed to say. I told him words can't express our gratitude, and that's how I feel, and I'm going to miss Jim a lot, so thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Last member of the family we're going to hear from is his daughter, Renee. Renee may or may not know this, but I have a daughter just about your age. And when your mother and I worked together in CDRH, we would commiserate about teenage daughters. Some of it was good. Don't worry. I know you've since moved out to California. I know Jim and Cynthia would go out there for a number of winters to be closer to you and your husband and your kids. So please share your thoughts. And after Renee speaks, we're going to have a momentary pause. Many of you have heard the bagpiper on the way in, and he's going to share a musical interlude with us after you finish.
Thank you all for being here today. It means a lot to our whole family. Jim was much more than a stepdad to me. He was a best friend, an altruistic leader, and now a guiding light. He was so kind to everyone, which is why so many of us are gathered together here now to honor how far his human touch reached. We may not have the amazing Jim Benson here with us anymore, but his legacy, this legacy he created in this room, of so many of us gathered together in mutual agreement over the far-reaching effect of his goodness, sound judgment, and compassion lives on. He helped guide me and give me strong, clear advice as I grew up. He was so insightful, non-judgmental, and cool in all senses of the word. His wit and good humor set him apart. I loved how he never took himself too seriously and was laid back, yet managed to reach the pinnacle of success in both his personal and professional lives. Because he was such an exemplary figure, so many of us have looked to him for guidance. Whenever I needed direction in my life, I asked Jim for advice. Jim was always so honest and direct when we spoke. His advice still guides me now. All the qualities anyone would want in a father and a friend were found in Jim. Though I tried to tell him over the years in cards, on the phone, when we were sitting together in the family room, before he walked me down the aisle at my wedding, I wanted one last chance to tell him he was just the best. I wanted to tell him thanks for everything he did for me. I wanted to tell him thanks for being in my life and how much he meant to all of us. So when my mother called me in San Diego, where my family lives, 2 weeks ago to tell me, "You may want to come here to say goodbye to your stepdad," I flew on a red-eye flight determined to give him one last hug and remind him what a pillar of strength he was. I didn't make it in time. He was gone. Mom assured me he already knew how much he meant to me. This time of loss has undoubtedly been the toughest for my mom, his devoted wife. He called her his rock during what would be our final family gathering at my parents' home during the holidays. 2 days after Christmas, our blended family gathered around the dinner table. Jim raised a toast. He thanked all of us for gathering together and said how much it meant to him. At the end of his toast, he turned to my mom and thanked her for her years of devotion and expert around-the-clock care as his health declined. Jim said how extremely appreciative he was of my mother and how he couldn't have made it through without her. He had tears in his eyes, but his voice was calm and steady. He loved my mom so much. He could have said anything to us that evening, and we would have listened intently all the same, but he chose to make it about my mom and his gratitude to her. So in thinking about what Jim would want me to write in this speech, I can hear him telling me to thank all of you for coming today to celebrate his life, and to most especially thank my mother for her goodness and for being the best mother, wife, and caretaker. She never gave up. During the last years of constant medical appointments to the various doctors and offices, she never stopped asking questions in a determined effort to help Jim beat this. She was Jim's best friend through sickness and health, and for all she meant to Jim, I know Jim would be most happy to see her honored for her devotion and love. And if you need help with any facts concerning this legendary man, my mom is the preeminent James Benson scholar. Through the years and throughout their home, she hung up every single HHS, FDA, CDRH, HOA, USA, presidential award, family photos of new grandchildren, honorary medal that Jim ever earned. She even hung up significant golf balls from his stellar Lakewood golf games. Without a doubt, she will ensure his legacy lives on. We love you, Mom, and Mom loves poetry and Jim. So I would like to leave you with a poem which is often attributed to transcendental poet Ralph Waldo Emerson, called That Man is a Success. It speaks to Jim's profound success as a wonderful husband, father, government leader, and success at whatever he was to each of you. Success. He has achieved success who has lived well, laughed often, and loved much, who has enjoyed the trust of pure women, the respect of intelligent men, and the love of little children, who has filled his niche and accomplished his task, who has never lacked appreciation of earth's beauty or failed to express it, who has left the world better than he found it. Whether an improved copy, a perfect poem, or a rescued soul, who has always looked for the best in others and given them the best he had, whose life was an inspiration, whose memory a benediction. We love you, Jim. Thank you.
That was beautiful. Thank you very much. I want to move on now to Jim's friends. We'll start right here at Lakewood Country Club, where we're all convened. I golfed myself with Jim here and was not a bit surprised when we came back and had lunch. Virtually everybody in the room came over to greet him. His friend, Art Schlesinger, his golfing buddy, is going to come up now and let Art tell you about his golf swing and other things.
Yeah, nothing like trying to follow Danny Boy. Okay. My name's Art Schlesinger, and I was a golf crony with Jim Benson. And I joined the club 10 years ago, and Jim was the first person I really played golf with. And he took me under his wing, as you have seen so many other examples. And he tried to explain to me the rituals and the rules of golf here at Lakewood. And I think he probably thought I had some kind of buyer's remorse, or maybe he was worried that I had violated one of the great tenets of life and joined a club that would have me as a member. But Jim and I have a lot in common beside the white beard. We both have degrees in engineering. We both have master's degrees in health-related issues, and we both spent our entire careers working on the interface between science and humanity. And of course, we also shared an obsession with golf, and we'd be out there when the weather was abysmal. We'd be out there when there weren't penguins playing golf. It was just no reason to be out there, but we were, because we were committed to it, and it was two old men playing golf, trying to ignore as many rules of golf as we could. But it was a lot of fun, and we shared a lot in a relatively short period of time. I had the honor of helping Jim repair the faucet in his sink because I happened to have the wrench that fit, but more importantly, I fit under the sink and Jim didn't. And then towards the end, things obviously were not as happy. And Mark, I'm sorry to tell you, but Jim asked me to help take down the radio-controlled planes and dispose of them. So I spent a morning with Jim cutting the wires and bringing the planes down. And I kept saying, there must be someone who could use these. And he just said, no, they're obsolete, they're obsolete. I said, there must be somebody. So we proceeded to the Montgomery County waste disposal area, and I'm putting these planes in the hopper where the waste goes, and the woman next to us is looking like, you people must be demented. You are throwing those out? And I kept, what could I do? I said, this is what the man wants me to do. You know, and it was heartbreaking, because I could see in his face that it was one more door that was closing as he aged, and he knew it. And I kept saying, Jim, there must be something else we can do with these. And he kept saying, they're obsolete, get rid of them. And the expression was not pleasant. Towards the end, in the last several months, Jim and I had lunch once a week, and we always would enjoy the haute cuisine at IHOP. And people, yeah, IHOP? You two could eat anything. You're eating at IHOP. I said, you're not thinking like an engineer. We ate at IHOP because it was one of the few restaurants that was quiet enough that we could hear each other. So, and that's the type of thing that we shared, including innumerable conversations about the fluid dynamics of golf ball flight. But I won't bore you with that, because he and I were the only engineers who would understand why we would be talking about that. So I was dealing with his departure and feeling really bad about it. And I had an epiphany that said, you know, Art, there are people you're going to see in this room who knew him dramatically longer than the 10 years I knew Jim Benson. And they're probably feeling pretty bad. And their hole in their psyche is probably a lot deeper than mine. And I happened to be thinking about this while I was watching the royal wedding. And there was Bishop Curry talking about the need for love in the world, and in his gospel cadence, bouncing off the stone walls of this ancient cathedral, he says, we need more love in the world, and if you want to see that love, just look around you. And I thought, that's really what we need right now. That's really applicable. If you want to understand the love and respect that this man engendered, just look around you. There it is. Thank you.
Yes, I think we've all been looking around. I was recently in a restaurant with my wife, Legal Seafood out at Tyson's Corner, and I looked around and in walks Jim Benson and Cynthia. And they were able to join us for lunch, and that was just such a lovely occasion. Jim was an active member of the Tower Oaks Homeowners Association. Dr. Renate Greenspan from that association. I haven't had a chance to meet you, so you'll need to self-identify. Please come up. I can only imagine Jim at those board meetings demanding to know what the problem was. And
I have stories to tell. Thank you for inviting me to speak, because it is important to say what Jim meant for the Tower Oaks community. For all of you who are going to have problems with my Polish accent, I apologize, but there's nothing I can do about it. Well, we are a young community. It was created 20 years ago. It's a small community. And Jim and Cynthia, my husband and I, moved to the same area at the same time. And you know, everybody likes to live in a nice community, right? But it became very apparent very quickly that Jim really had the well-being of community at heart. He was very interested in people who were moving in. He talked to them, he got to know them, they trusted him, they had a very strong relationship. He was good with managers of the community. He knew the people who worked, so he was interested in how the community is being constructed. So he became the leader, and in no time he became the president of HOA. And it was around the year 2000, and he worked with HOA as the president to 2013. I cannot tell you that at the board meetings everything was fine, because Jim was domineering, he was stubborn, and he lost his patience. I'm also happy to tell you that at the end of each meeting, two things happened. There were no dead bodies on the floor, and Cynthia usually came up with dessert, which soothes everybody's emotions. So we left actually friends, and we managed to do things together. And during that time, you know, every community has its upheavals. So we had few. The first thing was the city of Rockville wanted to change our traffic lights going from the community to Wootton Parkway. And for all of you who are familiar with the community, you know that without left-turn signal, we would be dead. There's so many accidents there with all the lights there that without those lights, a big town of ghosts. And so Jim had good relation with City Hall, with traffic engineers, with police, and that was saved. The other event, which I hope we can all forget, remember, I think it was 2008, that Pepco had a real problem with providing electricity in Montgomery County. So we had 13 days of power failure, some of them in dead of winter, some of them in very hot summer. It was all very uncomfortable. And Jim was on the City Hall and on the Pepco, so they eventually came, made sure that most of the wires were buried and the trees were trimmed. So since then, we don't have any problems. Every time there's a snowstorm, a windstorm, whatever storm, I'm grateful that Jim was there to help us out. And of course, the biggest event was when retaining wall behind our houses fell, and suddenly there was a lot of rain, and I guess it was a lot of rain, and the wall broke, and suddenly the houses were sliding down, which obviously was like a scene from Malibu, but we were not ready for it. So, I think it was really because of Jim, who really had such a close relation with fire people, with police, with City Hall, that we were, those first few hours when these things were really happening and they were really bad, that there was a sense of organization, that the people came, they helped, that nothing exploded, there was a great danger of fire, and also they, damage to property. So then he also had pretty good relation with Tower Oak management, the people who owned the land in this area. And they took all the financial responsibility, which was a small blessing for our community because we would have to have a special assessment. So we survived, and in 2013, when he left the board as the president, Nancy Hart, who is here with us today, was on behalf of the community put Jim for the word of a good neighbor. All of us, especially the ones who work for government, know that if you stay in your job for long, you get some kind of award. Well, the award that came for Jim was an award put forward by his peers, by people who didn't have to do it. There was no need to do it. It was done in appreciation of all his work. And I was in City Hall when Jim got this award in October of 2013. And Nancy, thank you very much for doing that for Jim. But he was a good neighbor. That's what it was. He cared for people. He knew people. People called them because the cat was missing, or my wife, burned the dinner or whatever. But he was really, really there for everybody, and nothing was too small. He actually enjoyed the fact that people trusted him enough that they came and talked to him. And of course, after he left the presidency, he still worked with Elise, Pete, myself in design review committee. As you know, we have very strict rules, and we don't let people do anything they want to do, to thinking that they are beautifying their house and the community. So Jim was very good about explaining to people why, having the hanging gardens of Babylon in the back of your house is not such a good idea, or having, Fontana di Trevi in front of your house is not going to go. People were not offended. So if we told the person, no, you have to go back, you have to design something else, they didn't try to set his house on fire. And so actually, the last communication that Elise and I got from Jim about the design review committee was a few days before he died. He was in the hospital already, and the way we work through emails, and somebody put up the project, and whoever, any of us who picked up that first, looked at it, made the comments, and made sure that the rest of us saw it. So Elise didn't even know he was in the hospital. She says, Renate, I just got a message from Jim that this project should be approved. I said, Jim is in the hospital. And he still had his cell phone with him, he still read it, he still logged it, and he still made sure that we answer, because obviously people who want to do projects, they want to have answer today and not 3 months from now. So, till the end, he was a good neighbor, and he was a friend. And, nobody ever dies if the person is remembered. And in the Tower Oaks community, Jim is sort of a fiber of that community. And we're all going to remember him as a good neighbor, a person who cared, who made our place where we live a much better place. And we are glad that you are still with us. And thank you very much for all those desserts. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody has been very attentive and very patient. We're now going to turn to the final section, which is some speakers from the FDA. You'll all be relieved to know that we have streamlined from Jim Benson's retirement dinner that I still remember, that probably went on for hours and hours. But we do have 2 speakers and 1 short letter. I worked with Jim most closely when he was in the office of commissioner. And a man named Frank Young, who was commissioner at the time, brought him up to be deputy commissioner. And Frank sent this letter to Cynthia, who shared it with me yesterday. I just want to read a short excerpt from it. Dear Cynthia, and expresses his deepest sympathies. I was honored to have the privilege of working with Jim when he was deputy director of the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, a leader in the working group that developed the action plan for FDA, and as deputy commissioner of FDA. His stewardship as acting commissioner was superb. In all these positions, Jim displayed not only leadership, but integrity in his advice and recommendations. Jim could always be counted upon to give an honest appraisal of the situation. As commissioner, I relied on his judgment, but more than that, I enjoyed his friendship. And I kind of keep dwelling on the phrase, Jim could always be counted upon. And I think everybody who has spoken to that central point. Jim's roots at FDA go back originally to what was the Bureau of Radiological Health, and then the Bureau of Radiological Health combined with the Bureau of Medical Devices become the Center for Devices and Radiological Health. For a little while, the National Center that John will remember, I'm sure. Our first speaker is Joe Arcarese. Joe was the head of an office called the Office of Training and Assistance, OTA. And the person who preceded Joe in that position, if my memory is correct, is none other than one Jim Benson. So he succeeded him and had to, think of it, he had to follow in those footsteps. So this guy deserves. Please, come on up, Joe.
It's a pleasure to be in the company of so many of Jim's friends and colleagues here to pay their respects to his memory and to support Cynthia and all his family in their loss. But this is not the kind of occasion that any of us would have preferred to honor him in. We would have preferred that Jim be here, sitting in front of the assembly, taking the sincere congratulations and even the roasting that he so richly deserved from all those who loved and admired him. I, for one, would have loved to tell him again how much I appreciated all the mentoring and support he gave me over so many years since 1968 when I first met him, that so enriched me and my public health career. I wanted to tell him how much I learned from him and John Vilforth about good and ethical leadership. I know that many of my contemporaries felt that way too. I told him that, all that, when I retired, but these sentiments certainly deserve repetition. I also have some complaints that I wish I could have told him. For one, he gave me an aversion to the color green. And Mark, you referred to this. He wrote all his notes in green ink for some godforsaken reason. And whenever you got such a green note, usually in tight script all over the margins of a memo or report you and your staff had spent hours and hours composing, it typically spelled his dissatisfaction, and it meant hours and hours of more work to fix it. For the same reason, I have an aversion to the color red, the ink color Belfort always used. Think of it, going through your whole adult life where the color green or the color red causes you to break out in a Pavlovian sweat. I wish I wanted to tell him that. Another thing I wanted to tell him, he made me hate tennis. You see, in the good old days of BRH and CDRH, when Jim was the deputy director, Jim and John had a small meeting room in the Twinbrook building in Rockville, T503, located right between their separate offices. My deputy and I would meet with them in that small room for weekly meetings. Jim would sit at one end of the meeting table and John would sit at the other, and we would sit on the sides. We'd meet with them to summarize our progress dealing with issues, or to suggest new programs, or consult with them on problems we were dealing with. Anyway, barely after we started, they would bat questions and criticisms back and forth across the table, often one starting a question and the other doubling down on it. All the while, our heads would be twisting back and forth, trying desperately to get an explanatory word in. Like playing a championship tennis match, they would bat that verbal ball rocketing across the table between them. I cannot watch tennis anymore without getting a Pavlovian neck sprain. I wanted to tell him that. Once after one such competitive session, I told Jim and John something they probably knew already, that I sometimes left a meeting with them spitting mad. But never once, I said, did I ever doubt that their decisions weren't made in the best interests of public health, nor did I ever suspect that their decisions came out of some dishonest or biased agenda. The thing I would want most to tell Jim now is how much I admired his intellect, his integrity, and how he upheld the highest principles of public health. He had a great positive impact on me, and I have tried to pass those virtues forward to those who look to me for leadership. Thank you.
Finally, and you've already heard reference to him, is John Belfort. Nobody, I think, worked probably longer or closer with Jim than John did. John was a longtime director of the Bureau of Radiological Health, with Jim was his deputy, then of the combined Center for Devices and Radiological Health, where Jim was his deputy. After retirement, John helped co-found the FD Alumni Association, and of course got Jim to be a longtime member of the board. And so it is a great honor to turn this over to Mr. Belfort.
This is a wonderful session to give an opportunity from all aspects, family, friends, and it's very emotional, I think, for all of us to have a chance to be exposed to these sorts of things. I have to be a little different than you gave, so I'm going to be a little more different by moving it back to around, probably around 1960, 59 and 60. And I brought the chart that goes with this. And the interesting thing to me was that there were so many people in the organization before your time, and some of your other people had their time in that. And there was just about 12 of us who were working with radioactivity, specifically radium, my favorite subject. And Jim was doing some things in that particular period right after he came back into Rockville, having a little experience up in one of the reactors before he came here. We'd even talk about radiation in reactors, but Jim was doing some of that stuff before he came into the public health service. So he and I were involved in trying to figure out what was this stuff all about, sort of a joke. Not a joke, it was a joke for me because he knew what he was doing. I wasn't doing anything. But I had a lot of opportunity to get pictures of Jim in 2 years or so before the few years that the rest of us got involved. This was basically, the picture was taken in 1963. Jim was, of course, a photographer, and some of us tried to learn how to do it right. Jim was doing that sort of thing. So I happened to find this picture and blew it up, and so there was a change. But this was a critical time because Jim looks like he's just getting out of high school. We'll turn more about that because there was a different period with him. But I want to go back to that period. I'll give you an older picture about Jim looking with gray hair and looking more sophisticated. So you can put this in your collection here to make sure you'll have an opportunity to do these things with him. Now, Jim was trying to find out what was happening with radiation in this program. There were almost, hundreds of people in this facility down in Rockville, but there was only a few of us doing this particular program with radioactivity. So we were working with Jim and several of the staff, and I had an opportunity to meet with and work with Jim at that time. One of the problems that we dealt with was that the many organizations within the state health departments of the Public Health Service, and those of us who were here at the federal level had an opportunity to talk about the sources of radioactivity. But the sources that were being worked with, we were not quite sure, neither was Jim quite sure, and we wanted to make sure that the risk of people, mainly the physicians who were working with radioactive sources in medical hospitals and so forth. And Jim came up with the idea, I gotta fix it, he said. And so the sources that he came up with were dealing with radioactive, specifically the radium that Jim was playing around with, trying to figure out how this was working. So basically what he was doing was trying to look at these sources that he was playing with radioactive sources inside platinum, which was kind of an expensive thing. The radium at that time was more expensive than gold, silver, and so forth. And the industry, the main medical group, were using these things and trying to figure out what was this work, how did this work? Because they were hollow, platinum hollow, and inside was the radium. Marie Curie and so forth, who was the one that designed in the early 1900s, pre-1900s, and she was putting this powder inside the source, and filling it in. And then the question was, okay, what are you going to do with this stuff? And Jim said, I think I know what I can do. And I was in charge of that little group of a handful of people, and I thought I knew what I was doing, but he got it right. The question was, okay, how to fix this? John, okay, Jim, how do you do it? We want to make sure that we do this correctly. And he did it. I didn't know how to do this, but he figured it out. And he was the only one of the whole group in that facility in the Chapman Avenue. And so Jim came out with the sources, and he tried to put them in. He showed how he could be doing with this. That was really a very simple problem. And so everybody here has a copy of the discussion. What the hell's he talking about? Jim had the opportunity to put a device that could be put inside a radio, a device made out of lead to protect Jim, because he was working around lead, placing around devices he had, and could show that he was able to reduce the risk, and it improved the incidence. Now that sounded like crazy, because I was in charge, but he didn't. I didn't know how he did it, but he did it. He basically took the sources, put them in there, able to share the material, and then reduce the risk to any of the doctors, because these needles could go back to the physician or the hospitals if they were checked over. And so he put together something that with these hundreds of people, well, a larger number of people in the hospital facility. He fixed it, put them all together, and found then able to see that they were basically free of any risk inside the program. None of the rest of us worked it out. Jim fixed it out, and I think we all looked with a lot of pleasure and enthusiasm to come up with this. So I have another picture of Jim, which is a little bit smaller. Not the same thing, but anyhow, Jim, wherever you are, you look great there, and we want to make sure that you look real great today. It's a wonderful experience for a guy like Jim to do with all these kinds of people who are around who are doing all sorts of the science, all sorts of the administration. Jim was able to put it together. So instead of having these programs, I guess we ended up around close to 1,000 of these people in this building able to do this stuff. But the element of it was a guy by the name of Jim Benson that was doing stuff that was giving a whole period of enthusiasm and interest. I gotta say, I'm so proud of what Jim had done over the years, and I wanted to just say that it couldn't have worked if we didn't have a Jim Benson who could put this stuff together and could able to do the leadership. Yes, sure. Then there was a thing called besides the radiation program, there were a lot of people who were working with medical devices. We were doing things there with all sorts of problems with medical devices and radiation. The thing was called the CR, Conference and Radiation Control Program Directors, and that was Jim's program. Last week, the program existed in the state of all of the countries, all of the state people had a meeting. Jim, the group was talking about the importance of radiation in all the states. And one of the things that they were doing this last week, was to talk about, among other things, the importance of the kind of stuff that Jim was doing back in old 96, number 4, 92, whatever, that those programs went to those people who are doing the same sort of stuff that Jim is doing and fixing it. It's incredible, and it was done well. It's an example to me that we are fortunate to have a Jim Benson who could do these things and who did such a valuable source. And I want to say to all of you, as you talked about the same sorts of differences, whether it's the boxes or airplanes or the devices or the carpentry, all of that sort of stuff, it was just wonderful stuff. And I want to say thank you for the opportunity, and I miss him too. Thank you.
Well, been a lot said, a lot shared, a lot of tears of joy and just tears of remembrance. I want to thank everybody. We have a couple of things still going on. One, as I mentioned at the beginning, there will be a reception and a luncheon in the main ballroom. So you go out the door you came in, around to the front, but don't go out the front door. Make a U-turn in. I have a favor of someone from the country club. If we could move the guest book somehow back to that ballroom so people can come and sign it sometime during the lunch, and we won't need to have a long line. We'll want the long line to be at the buffet. Finally, again, there will be the videographer person will be coming around. If anybody wants to share a personal remembrance, that's your opportunity to do so. We want to conclude. I want to conclude where we started with Pastor Derek Solberg to have a closing prayer for us all.
It's been such an absolute honor to hear these stories and these remembrances from family, friend, colleagues. You know, I didn't have the honor of knowing Jim, but he just comes to life through your words, and it's just such an honor to hear about him. And I know that he's just glowing hearing your words, and that's not a pun after the conversation about radiation. So friends, let us commend Jim to the mercy of God and to our Redeemer. Hat and all. Into your hands, O merciful Savior, we commend your servant and our brother Jim. Acknowledge, we humbly beseech you, a sheep of your own fold, a lamb of your own flock, a sinner of your own redeeming. Receive him into the arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and into the glorious company of your saints in light. And friends, I invite you all to please stand and either join in the Lord's Prayer as Jesus taught, or to offer a prayer in silence from the depths of your heart. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Friends, family, let us go forth in peace and light. Amen.
It's not going to be broadcast, just for their video.
I mean, they're going to throw us out in 20
There was a memorandum. Did he like this car? Yeah. Well, I thought.
started. Can you guys figure out for each other? There you go. As much contact as possible is nice. We don't want to golf ourselves.
All I can do is think of your girl pictures. Nice.
Do you want to do
This is their normal.
pictures?
It's going to be a hokey then, right?
Yeah.
Yep. When do you find out you're married?
Yeah, she's from Illinois, so I'm not going to know her. Oh, okay. So, did you have like a...
Yeah.
So you have.
So you guys are like...
No, he's just told me I was
I
mean, unless I'm like, let's keep it blood, baby. Yeah. I mean, nothing crazy.
Are you ready, guys?
And then like every one of them, no, just mine. Did they have Samantha?
I'm going to move now.
Hi, Cynthia and family. We are so sorry to learn of Jim's passing. As you know, my dad, Kshitij Mohan, was a very dear old family friend dear colleague and friend of Jim's. I was thinking today as I was hearing all of the stories that my dad would have had so many more to share. Our hearts go out to you. He was a wonderful man, and we'll be thinking of you.
Well, I got to know both Jim Benson separately than I did Cynthia, and she used to when they got married. I remember Cynthia telling me how she was thrilled to have the wedding on the beach. Good luck. Take care.
Hi, Cynthia. Jeff and Linda here. Here's Linda. Just want to say how much we will miss Jim. Enjoyed playing golf with him and participating in other activities, and we will certainly keep in touch. Love you.
Cynthia, it was a remarkable day today. Seeing your family, the blended family, was fantastic. We all love Jim. Of course, not nearly as much as you, and won't miss him nearly as much as you, but we miss him. And just a great guy, great family, and we hope to see you soon. Take care.
Yes, I just wanted to say that Jim was a wonderful nephew, and I consider him a gift to all humanity.
Jimmy was my first cousin, and when we were very, very young, we played together all the time. We were very close, and he was very handsome, so as we got a little older, I always had a crush on him. So that's my only story. I was closer, I haven't seen him much as an adult. Wonderful boy, though.
Well, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, or even private speaking, I wanted to remind people of the fact that Jim Benson was a real killer volleyball player, especially if you were on the same side of the net that he was on, because he would run over you to spike the ball. Anyway, I wish Cynthia and the family all the best.
My wife and I were fortunate enough to see Jim about 3 months ago at Shady Grove Rehab Center. Okay. My wife and I, Thespina, were fortunate enough to see Jim at Shady Grove Rehabilitation Center in February, and we had a nice short talk with him, and it was just a real pleasure to see him again. Thank you.
Granddad was always there for me, and I could talk to him about anything. I did first Lego League, and I could talk about him for hours.
Hi, I remember Jim very well. I remember how great of a person he was, how personable he was. My office was outside of his, so he had to go. Well, his was, of course, a little larger than mine. But anyway, he had to go by my little office to get to his office. And that was in the early 80s when I first started working for FDA. But I'll always remember what a wonderful person he was. Thank you.
Okay, Granddude was a really nice guy, and he loved golf, and really nice and funny, and that's all I have to say.